Hi, this is Rick Yates, Technical Services Manager for GGS Pro and Griffin. In this short video, we're going to take a look at the possibility of using additional micronutrient supplementation to reduce the overall amount of fertilizer that we're using. This was a topic of interest even before the recent increase in fertilizer prices and in some cases the lack of fertilizer supply. It wasn't that long ago that recommendations for fertilizer levels for many of our major crops are much higher than they are today. I can recall 400 parts per million constant feed being advised for Easter lilies, in part to help keep the crop short by the high level of salts in the soil. Poinsettias, chrysanthemums, very common to have 300 parts per million or higher recommended as a constant feed. That's all changed now. I think it's worth taking a look at why that might be. Liebig's law of the minimum was developed by a German chemist back in the 1800s, and we're still using the overall concept that it teaches today in crop nutrition. If I were to try to summarize it in a sentence or two, I would say that the availability of the most abundant nutrient in the soil is only as good as the availability of the least abundant nutrient in the soil. Let's take a look at how that plays out. I like to use this simple illustration to try to demonstrate how Liebig's law of the minimum applies. In this case, if you take a look at this barrel and we assign each stave of the barrel one of the essential nutrients, what it's trying to portray is the fact that if I have one nutrient that is deficient, adding more of the other nutrients is not going to improve plant growth until I address the deficiency. A simple case study might be a good way of describing how we could use Liebig's law of the minimum to solve a problem and save fertilizer at the same time. I like to use garden mums for this example because I've seen this scenario play out many times in the field. So a grower has a great looking crop of garden mums, but they notice in certain varieties that the growing tips are starting to turn yellow. We'll stop here and say that most of us would say that the first thing we need to do is check the soil pH to see if it's coming up. That'd be really good advice. But for the sake of this example, we're going to push on. So the grower says to themselves, I'm only feeding 200 parts per million. I bet if I increase the parts per million to 300 for a while, I'll get those growing tips green again. Sure enough, it works, but probably not for the reason that they expected. What happened was, this crop, all it needed was some iron in order to get all of the nutrients back to the ideal levels and for those growing tips to turn green again. But what happened when they increased the fertilizer part per million by 50%, they added more iron and that solved the problem, but they added a whole lot of other nutrients they really didn't need. And even though that solved the problem, it cost them more money. But furthermore, there's definitely a price to be paid when we deliver luxury levels of nitrogen to a crop. In other words, more nitrogen than they really need. And we know that high levels of nitrogen in plant tissue can encourage foliar diseases such as botrytis and powdery mildew. We also know that the reproductive capacity of many insects and mites is increased by excess nitrogen in the tissue as well. So we got a lot of things going on. Take a step further. If we increase the soluble salt level in the soil, especially if that soil dries down, we can actually encourage Pythium by damaging the roots with the high soluble salts and causing that opportunistic disease become problematic for us. Some forward-thinking growers and consultants have taken it a step further and said, I wonder if I can reduce the parts per million of NPK that I'm using, but keep the level of micronutrients as if we were still feeding at 200 parts per million and save fertilizer. In order to be able to advise growers that like to experiment with holding their micronutrient levels steady while reducing their NPK, I took a look at some of the more commonly available micronutrient solutions. There's more good ones out there. I happen to have information readily available in these three, and that's why I selected them. So what I did was take a common rate of 4 ounces per 100 gallons and take a look at how much of the micronutrients that this would provide. Down the left-hand side of this chart, you'll see the amount of micronutrients provided by Jack's 21-5-20 at a constant feed of 200 parts per million. Now you could pick any fertilizer. I just chose one I thought was pretty common. And then to the right of that, you'll see for liquid stem and most, the amount of micronutrients that are provided if I add a quarter ounce per 100 gallons on a constant basis, or an eighth of an ounce per 100 gallons. In a very general way, I wanted to give some rough guidelines for any growers that are interested in experimenting with reducing the parts per million of NPK. So very roughly speaking, if you're considering dropping from 200 to 150 parts per million. A constant injection of an 1/8 ounce per 100 gallon of either one of the micronutrient solutions would get you pretty close. For those growers interested in trialing a drop from 200 to 100 parts per million, we're going to double that rate of micronutrients up to 1/4 ounce per 100 gallons. Now, this is rough figuring, and GGS Pro would be more than happy to go over your situation with you, help you through the calculations so that you can perform some trials. Really important that you trial this first before launching out to do it for the entire crop. Also, it's really important that through every step of the process here that we keep up with media and tissue analysis testing to make sure that we're meeting our objectives. Thanks so much for listening in on today's short video. If you have any questions for GGS Pro, or if you have suggestions for what you might like to see as a topic for future videos, you can either contact us at the email address or with our 800 number and extension.